There's Houston. He wants to see me. He missed you Sunday.
How very good.
And David like, what is wrong?
Who's this guy?
Thank you for being with us tonight for our Wednesday evening Bible study. We're delighted to welcome you, and we trust that our study of Genesis 41 will be of value and help in your Bible study. It may be tonight that some of you are ready to obey the gospel plan of salvation, become a Christian. Faith in Jesus Christ is necessary, and that faith comes by hearing His Word, Romans 10, verse 17. Repentance of sin is a must, required of all men everywhere, Acts 17:30. One is given the marvelous privilege of confessing, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, Acts 8:37, and being baptized in water to have his sins washed away by the blood of Christ, Acts 2:38. That individual is then added to the church by the Christ, Acts 2:47, and is raised to walk a new lifestyle according to the word of the Christ that will judge us in the last day, John 12, verse 48. Sometimes in our Christian walk, because of our weakness or immaturity, we sin, and we need to ask forgiveness. There's a prime example of that in Acts 8, 22-24 with Simon, and in Acts 19 with the people at Ephesus. And thus, if we might be of assistance to someone who needs help in obeying the gospel or being restored to fellowship, if you will make that desire known to us, we would be more than happy to do what we can to respond to that need. And if you're not in our area, if you'll contact us, we'll do our best to get someone to you that will be able to help you. And we trust that you will consider that very seriously. There is no more important step that an individual can take than obeying the gospel and living faithfully. In our Bible study, we are at the 41st chapter of the book of Genesis. We are developing what was prophesied in Genesis 15 to Abram, that the people of Jacob would leave the land of Canaan and go into a foreign country. And there they would be servants. They would serve with rigor. And then that foreign country would be judged by Jehovah. And that nation would be delivered. We're in the very initial stages of moving Jacob's family out of Canaan because of the wicked influence of the Canaanites, and moving them into Egypt, from whence, after about 215 years, they will be extricated by Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. That takes us down to, basically, the 14th chapter of the book of Exodus, and then moving forward, coming to Mount Sinai, Exodus 19, staying there all the way through the first half of Numbers chapter 10, and then leaving Sinai, presumptuously, to go conquer Canaan, but they were not faithful in doing that. Numbers 13 and 14. And thus they wander in the wilderness for 38 and a half years, until eventually they come to the plains of Moab, where every individual over 20 years of age, except those of the Levites and Joshua and Caleb, have died. We have a new generation, and they're given the law of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, preparatory to their moving in and conquering the land of Canaan in the book of Joshua. Joseph becomes the channel through whom the children of Jacob, the family of Jacob, is taken into Egypt. In chapter 37, as a 17-year-old boy, he's sold into slavery by his brothers. In chapter 39, he is bought by a man named Potiphar, captain of the guard, chief of the executioners. And he serves in Potiphar's house for a number of perhaps years, we do not know how many. And things are blessed by Jehovah in his hand 2 times in the first part of Genesis 39. Mrs. Potiphar wants to commit adultery with him, and he refuses. And thus he is cast into prison, the latter half of Genesis 39. And 2 times in that section, it is stated Jehovah was with Joseph, and he made what he did to prosper. In chapter 40, there is a baker and a butler who are sentenced by Pharaoh to that same prison and cared for by Joseph. Each of them had a dream, and Joseph interpreted the dream. The baker was executed, the butler was restored, and Joseph requested of the butler, "When you are restored, remember me." But the butler forgot him. 2 whole years pass, and Pharaoh has 2 dreams, which are in reality one. And no one can interpret it. And the butler remembered Joseph. So Joseph is brought out of the dungeon, dressed appropriately, cleaned up as it were, and brought before Pharaoh. And he announces to Pharaoh, God is showing to Pharaoh what is to shortly come to pass. And he interprets the dream to mean there will be 7 years of extreme plenty. There will be so much that wisdom will allow it to be stored for future years in Egypt. Those 7 years of abundant plenteousness will be followed by 7 years of immense famine. The famine will be so bad that those who are aware of the 7 years of plenty will forget them. They will not even apparently be a distant memory because of the severity of the famine. So Joseph interprets these dreams always, as in chapter 40, giving credit to God, not himself. And then, uppercase E on your outline, verses 33 through 36. Joseph gives suggestions, underscore that, for preparation for these years that are to come, 14 years. What should be done? In verse 33, you have Joseph's conclusion based on the premises that it is the case that 7 years of plenty will be followed by 7 years of famine. And therefore, the preparation needs to be made. So he says in verse 33, now, therefore, having drawn that conclusion, he then sets forth the course to follow. He not only gives the facts, but he gives a plan of operation. It doesn't take all the time a whole lot of savvy to be able to relate facts. But it takes a great deal of wisdom to know what to do about it, how to use those facts, and to come to a proper outcome. And all of us need to pray for that kind of wisdom in our lives. That's involved in leaving a church house where we've studied the principles of the Word of God and knowing how to apply them in our everyday lives as we interact with other souls. It's one thing to sit on the pew and learn. It's another to practice, to know how to make application. And we all need that ability. And it takes wisdom to be able to do that. So Joseph says, here is a course that needs to be followed. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Notice, one man. Select a discerning and wise man. Your translation may use the word discreet. It's a Hebrew word that means someone who has insight, understanding, intelligence. And having that understanding and intelligence, he needs to be wise. Someone who is skillful or artful in the administration of governmental civil affairs. That would call to mind the wisest governmental official that has ever lived on the face of this earth. And he is the wisest governmental official because his wisdom came from God. And that's Solomon. Often we taught our boys and girls that Solomon was the wisest man in the earth. That's not true. That's too broad. All the text tells us is he was wise in administrative affairs. That's what he asked for and what Jehovah granted him. If you look at his lifestyle, he was a very foolish man. And he made some terrible decisions spiritually. So he wasn't the wisest man who ever lived, or the wisest human on the face of the earth. But notice, Pharaoh does the selecting. Joseph is suggesting. Pharaoh selects. Now that's very important. Joseph remains as a slave. Now he's been elevated. He's in the palace. He's interpreting the dream. He's giving the course to follow, but he's still a Hebrew slave. And for him to have said, you need to appoint me, or you need to appoint this person or that person, would have been without the authority to so suggest. So he says, by implication, you pick the man. Let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man. And, notice this, set him, singular, over the land of Egypt. That's interesting. Set him over the entirety of the land. That's a suggestion. My doctor is fond of saying, when he suggests a course of action, now this is not a dictatorship. I'm not dictating how you are to act on this. I'm giving you facts. You make the decision as to how you're going to follow up. And that's exactly what Joseph is doing. Joseph is saying, here are the suggestions, but you make the decision. Notice that the key to the success of the plan rests in one man. Selecting the right administrator. Now, if you want to do a rich Bible study, start in Genesis and go to Revelation as our Bibles are laid out. And look at how many times the success of a plan depended on one man or one person. You select the wrong administrator here, and you're going to have disaster. Probably most of you have lived long enough to see that enacted in life. You put someone over something who is exceeding the limit of his intelligence, and he proceeds to destroy it. You select the wise individual, the right individual as an administrator, and everything works well, works flawlessly. So notice you have one man, a wise administrator. That says you don't just grab somebody and stick them in a position so you can fill that position. It's been my experience through the years, 49 of them now, that some people in the church have made some tragic mistakes in doing that very thing. We need an elder, let's grab somebody. Is he qualified? Well, we need an elder. We need a deacon, let's grab somebody. Well, is he qualified? Well, we need a deacon. We need somebody to teach that class. Well, is he over his head? Is he qualified? We need a teacher. So you grab somebody, you stick them in, you go do this. And often, it's disaster. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to take up the time in a class setting. It takes a great deal of study and preparation and wisdom to use that time well. So the students have an opportunity to come away with something. These principles that I'm giving you is exactly what's implied right here in civil administration. But he didn't stop there. So you select one man, put him over the whole land. Verse 34, let Pharaoh do this. And then you have a coordinating conjunction, don't you, that joins things of equal standing. And select the right man, put him over the land, and let him appoint officers over the land. Overseers. Superintendents. So you have the right man in place, and then you have underlings. Some people don't like that terminology, but that's what it is. You have someone here and someone under. One fellow was bragging on his son one time, and he said, my son has 500 people under him. And people said, boy, that's amazing. What does your son do? He said he mows the cemetery lots. Well, you can have someone under you, and that doesn't mean you are in a great position. But this man would be in a great position, and these men would be in a great position, these people. So let Pharaoh select one man, the right man, put him over the land, and then select overseers, superintendents, over the land. So notice, these are over the land. Now if you take notes, what you have in 33 and the first part of 34 is what every leader needs to learn. It's a big jawbreaker word, the concept of which so many people miss. It's called delegation. Delegation of authority and responsibility. And what Joseph is saying here is select the right people and then turn them loose and leave them alone and let them do the job. He is not putting Pharaoh in a position of micromanaging. He is saying select these folks, you have confidence in them, turn them loose. Let them do the job. Elders need to learn that. A local congregation a few years ago had a group of elders from another congregation come in and meet with their elders. And they had an all-day Saturday session of learning how to be better elders from these men. And one of the things they were told was this: if you appoint a man a deacon, and that man is the CEO of a tremendous company, and you put him in charge of the building and grounds, don't you think he has enough sense to know whether or not the parking lot needs paving and how much money to spend? Without an elders meeting have to be being called and elders making that decision. And they said to those elders, you oversee the church. Let the deacons deacon. Let them do their work. You believe in them, give them the authority and the money to do what they want to do, and turn them loose. And that's a tremendous thing. Because I've seen elders have to meet about everything that ought to be turned over to somebody else and let them take care of the spiritual welfare of the church. But often leaders don't learn delegation. They think they have to make every decision. They have to have their finger in every pie. And I admit, as a young preacher, I had that crazy idea. My word is really, it's a stupid idea, but I use the original meaning of stupid, which is ignorant. Not the pejorative that's used in our day and age, throw off on me. It was just an ignorant decision. I thought I had to be involved in every activity, be involved in everything that was going on, and I nearly killed myself. When I'd been better off, stay home and let those folks alone. And as our friend in Georgia said, keep my mouth out of it. But I had learned that by experience. So what Joseph is saying here is select the right people. Turn them loose. As Pharaoh, you don't need to be walking around behind them micromanaging. You got the right people in place. Turn them loose. So you have a discreet, wise administrator. You have designated overseers, superintendents. And they're over the whole land as far as this matter is concerned. Now, you have the right people to appoint. Look at the process in 34 and 35 to authorize. Let Pharaoh do and let him appoint officers over the land. Now here's what they're to be doing. The officers are to collect 1/5 of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. Those of you who are acutely aware of my tremendous mathematical skills off the top of my head will appreciate the fact I wrote this down, so maybe I'll get it right. The overseers should collect 20%. Now under Judaism, that would be called a double tithe. 20% of the grain from the land during the years of plenty. Literally, the Hebrew word used there for 1/5 of the land of Egypt simply is 1/5 the land. Let them 1/5 the land. One writer said it's been shown by historians that tithing was practiced in ancient Egypt and in other nations as a form of taxes or tribute to the king. But a 20% levy would be very unusual. A tithe, yeah, there's records of that being done, but a double tithe, that'd be unusual. And verse 35, let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority, notice that, under the authority, literally under the hand you may have, of Pharaoh. And let them keep food in the city. So what Joseph is saying is, I'm not kicking you off the throne in this plan. You're still king, you're still Pharaoh, but delegate. And here's what you are to let them do in my suggested plan. You're going to make the decision, but here's what I'm suggesting. Collect 20% during those plentiful years. Now remember how plentiful those years are. They are super abounding. They're overflowing. It's not just the run-of-the-mill, okay, we had a good crop this year. It's unprecedented yield that is under consideration here. And then notice in 35, when they collect that food, do you have this terminology, store up, lay up, or something like that? Now there's your background principle for 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay in store. Some translations, lay by in store. What's that mean? Lay it up. Set it aside. That's what they're doing here. Here's the idea. So when you get to giving, it's not a new idea in the Bible. Here is grain, food, store it up, grain, uncooked grain, so they can prepare it later on. So let them store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Not scattered all through the land, but the food is stored in the cities. Notice, not one central city. The food is stored in cities throughout the land. Can you see the wisdom in that? Then you have, verse 36, the protection to anticipate. Then that food shall be a reserve. Marginal reading in this New King James is a supply. The food would be a reserve, a store for Egypt, for the 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. Get the picture. You're going to have 7 years of unprecedented yield. During that time, collect 20% of that. So you do 20% times 7, you'll get the idea of what they're doing. Every year, take 20%. Stored in the cities throughout the land. And that grain will protect you. It'll be a reserve. It'll be a store. During the 7 years of unprecedented famine that are going to be so bad you don't remember the years of plenty. Now, I've read a lot on this. It's always interesting that some people try to put it in perspective and they say, could you imagine the howl that went up over the land, 20% tax? No. If you're thinking in that vein, you're thinking completely off base. You've missed the point. The plenty will be so plentiful. 20% will seem as nothing. They won't miss it. It will be so easy to pay that tax because of what they're given that it wouldn't create a howl. Except from selfish people, covetous people, surely they'll howl about giving up 1%. But sensible people would not have a problem with this because of the abundance of provision. Now what's the point for us? When it comes to our material giving to support the work of the church, instead of comparing that to my paycheck, why not compare it to what God has given me? And I don't know about your life, but I've had a superabundance. So giving is not a have to, it's a get to. As we support the work of the church. These people are laying by in store for themselves. They're going to reap the benefits after the 7 years of plenty. Anything I give to the cause of God, I'm giving for my own benefit. I'll reap the good things from that. And you just study the principles of giving in the New Testament, that God will outgive you as you give. And you'll see what's going on here in the 7 years of plenty. God so gives that He is outgiving anything the Egyptians will give back in taxes, will lay up in taxes, would be a better way to say it. And then they're going to reap the benefits of the taxes. Now, when that doesn't work in government, you have quite a howl, don't you? You're paying all these taxes, but you aren't reaping the benefits. It seems like some folks dressed up like Indians and dumped a bunch of tea in the harbor in Boston over that kind of thing, something like, it was in history class, something like taxation without representation. Any of you remember that being thrown out there in your presence? That's when a howl goes up. But these people are going to see the benefit of the taxes. They get all the benefit of it. So Joseph says, here's what's going to happen. Here's a plan to deal with it, but you decide if you want to use this plan. You come up with your own if you'd like. But here's what I recommend that you do. Now, you're Pharaoh. What would you do? you get a forward mentality and have a better idea? Would you say you're a Hebrew slave? Who do you think you are suggesting anything for the greatest nation on earth? Or would you listen very carefully? I want to tell you something. It never hurts you to listen to somebody. They may actually know what they're talking about. I learned that. Thankfully, I didn't, as I've often had to do over all these years, put myself out there and look like an idiot to learn it, but I learned it. And let me tell you how. We had a man in our community that was a hermit, basically, lived by himself. If you drove by his house, you could barely see the house for the junk in the yard. If you saw him in town, you would think he didn't know what soap and water was. He usually had smudges of grease all over his face, it looked like. Clothes were usually dirty where he was working. And one day in our ag class, he was back using our shop, doing some work. And he walked into our classroom, just basically walked in during class, and our advisor, our teacher, recognized him. He said, I want to ask you a question. And he asked him some kind of mathematical question about whatever, I forget now, even the subject. Well, my teacher did what I do in mathematical things. He had to write it down. So he turned around and grabbed a piece of chalk and started writing those numbers up on the board to be able to figure it through. And before he ever got them written up there, he said from the back of the room, "Oh, never mind, here's what it is." And he'd given him the answer to this complicated situation right there from just in his head. And I thought, now everybody in this county thinks this man is ignorant. And some people treat him that way. He may be one of the most brilliant people in this county. It never hurts you to listen to somebody. And we'll see whether or not Pharaoh had that mentality. I'm telling you that so you don't have to spend all the years I spent having learned that lesson the hard way. There are some people who need to be heard. And then you make your decision after you get the facts. You check facts and you say, wait, will this work? Can we plug this in right here? Now in verses 37 to 45, I've entitled this section, Joseph Designated Ruler over Egypt. That word ruler is a mouthful here. Remember, we're dealing with a Hebrew slave. He's not given freedom in the sense of he's no longer Hebrew or that he's no longer a servant. We don't read anywhere that all that was commuted. But there are interesting things that we read. So he's designated. In verse 37, you see Pharaoh's mentality. Now we don't know a lot about this Pharaoh, but I think if you put the story in perspective, you come to appreciate him. He apparently was a man who contemplated. He thought things through. He accepted advice. He knew a good plan when he saw it. And he did not allow the status of the individual suggesting the plan to prejudice him against the plan. One of the things that we have denigrated into our nation is if you're in a certain class of people, politically or economically, there's another class that says, I don't care what you have to say, I'm not going to listen to you. I've automatically ruled out anything you suggest because of who you are or what you are. Pharaoh did not have that mindset. So in verse 37, you see the reception of Joseph's plan. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh. Sound is your word there. This is sound advice. And notice this. You have a coordinating conjunction there that joins things of equal standing. In the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of A-L-L, all his servants. Now, preparatory to studying the book of Exodus, I would call to your attention, and this is in uppercase A on your outline, these two designations. Pharaoh, his servants. We've seen in winter Bible class that those two designations become very important when Moses is dealing with Egypt and with Pharaoh in his house. But here you're introduced to them before you ever get to the Exodus. Sometimes we just read over things and we don't put the whole together, but you put it together. Here's the background for the organizational structure that Moses found years later. So you have the reception of Joseph's plan. Notice how it's considered. It's good. That's a good plan. Some of you may have listened to the Stafford Brothers, my favorite group. Well, the two brothers who really were brothers on that group, none of them were Stafford, but the two men who really were brothers wrote a book together about songs and how they picked them and why and so forth. And they wrote another book together about memories of the group. And I heard the two sons of these men, one each, interviewing their dads one night after the book on memories came out. And Harold and Don Reed were talking about how they wrote the book, and they would say, you know, I'd write a chapter and I'd give it to him. The other one would say, I'd write a chapter and give it to him. Now, Harold was the comedian in the bunch, and in this interview, he said, you know, I'd get a chapter and I'd start reading that, and I'd say, you know, that's pretty good stuff. And then he looked up and said, but he never said that about any of my chapters. Well, here Pharaoh says, this is pretty good stuff. This is an intelligent, wise plan. I'm going to adopt that. And the servant said, that's good. And if you're taking notes, learn this. It doesn't matter who suggested it. If it's what's needed, it's a good plan. If it's lawful according to God's law and it's what's needed, it's a good plan. It doesn't matter who got the credit for it. One writer said it's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit as long as God does. And that's Pharaoh's saving the attitude here. That's a good plan. So Pharaoh resolves to act on that. Verses 38 and 39. Remember, verse 33. Let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. 38 is a response to that. Pharaoh said to his servants. Now notice, he's getting input. That's great leadership here. Pharaoh's going to make the final decision, but he's getting input from people who are going to be involved in it. You get a congregation to feel like they own the program of work, that it's their program of work, and they'll support it. You get them to feel like the elders and the preacher came up with this and just told us this is what we're going to do, and if you get good support, you're lucky. But when people feel ownership, I may not have gotten my way, but they let me have my say. Haven't you been in those situations where if they just let you have your say, you don't care what decision to make as long as it's a good decision, just let me have my input. And if you're a leader, you need to think that way. Pharaoh said to his servants, now he's going to ask a rhetorical question. Remember, a rhetorical question is worded in a way it can only have one answer. The question itself suggests the answer. 33, you need a wise, discerning man. 38, Can we find such a one as this? A man in whom is the Spirit of God? But tie 39 with that. Then, when he asked this question, no indication he waited for response. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God, Elohim, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. Now here's a man who can reason. He's putting the pieces together and he reaches this conclusion. So he says, Joseph, you are alone in the qualifications. Can we find such a one as this? There he is. There's none so discreet and wise as you. Now this question may be twofold. It may have been rhetorical and nothing was said. It may have been a consultation and the servants weighed in on it. But notice this, if they were allowed to weigh in on it, elevating Joseph over them would not be an insult. If they were just given that arrangement, you could see how they could consider that as an insult. Who's this Hebrew slave to be elevated over me? And if you work at places where promotions take place, have you ever seen the jealousy that goes on during promotion time? Why did they get it and I didn't get it? I've been here all these years. This company couldn't run without me. Why, if I quit, they'd go broke overnight. I didn't get that promotion. What's wrong with them? But if these men said, he's the one we need to put over this, then when Joseph was elevated over them, there'd be no insult. Be no envy. And I rather lean, we'll have to get to heaven, no for sure. I rather lean to the position that they were giving input on this. That Pharaoh said, here's the man, they said, that's right. Now, if you mark in your notes, the last sentence on B1 lowercase a. The elevation of a Hebrew over the officers of Pharaoh lays the background for Moses and Aaron in Egypt years later. Remember that designation. Pharaoh, his servants. And notice here, notice the terminology of Pharaoh. Can we find a man in whom is the Spirit of Elohim? Inasmuch as Elohim has shown you all this. Notice the knowledge of Jehovah has reached the palace, if you mark in your notes a little bit, through channel a Hebrew. So here are Gentiles hearing about the God of heaven through a Hebrew. A channel. Have y'all ever sung the song Brighten the Corner Where You Are? Any of you familiar with that? Notice Joseph is brightening the corner where he is with the knowledge of God. So the knowledge of God has come from Potiphar's house, through the prison house, to the palace. Through Joseph, a Hebrew slave. And notice, number two, Joseph is associated with God as is seen in his displaying God's Spirit. Joseph has the Spirit of God. Ruach Elohim are the words. That's the same terminology in Genesis 1:2. The Spirit of God brooded over the face of the waters. And this places Joseph in the company of Joshua. Turn to Numbers 27. Look at verse 18. And Jehovah said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, with you a man in whom is the Spirit. This places him in company with Daniel. Turn to Daniel. Chapter 4. Verses 8 and 9. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. And see, that's so important back over in chapter 1, where their names are changed from a Hebrew name to a Babylonian name. Notice, it's according to the idolatrous worship system of Babylon. That's where those names originated. In him is the Spirit of the Holy God. Notice, you have my God there contrasted with the Holy God. And I told the dream before him, saying, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the Spirit of the Holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I've seen and its interpretation. Drop down to verse 18. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. Turn to chapter 5, verse 11. Belteshazzar is puzzled by a writing. And the queen says, there's a man in your kingdom in whom is the Spirit of the Holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Let Daniel be called, verse 12. And he will interpret the dream. Look at verse 14. Belshazzar says, I've heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now, let's change kingdoms. Let's move from Babylon to Medo-Persia, chapter 6. And look at verse 3. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. You know what you have there? A Hebrew slave. Carried away into Babylonian captivity with the first carrying away. 605 BC. So you have these similar characteristics. Joseph said, get a discreet and wise man. Pharaoh said, that's you. There's no one in Egypt like you who has the Spirit of God. You are alone in your qualifications. Now, I've never been in the hiring position, thankfully, and I've never had to make that decision. But I tell you, if I had to make one, and I had a list of candidates, and the qualifications of a candidate stood out like Joseph's do over everybody in the kingdom, I don't believe that'd be a hard decision. I think even I could make the right decision there. And that's what Pharaoh says. We don't have to go. Now that's significant. Here are people who have the wisdom of Egypt, the wisdom of the gods of Egypt, the idolatrous worship system, and Pharaoh, who is considered to be a god himself, says, our religious system fails us here because there's no one here who has the Spirit of God in it, like you do, that can work this plan. No one. So here you have the wisdom of God superior to the wisdom of man. See, this is God's plan, not Joseph's. He didn't originate this. This is inspiration. He interpreted the dream. He says, here's the plan. I tell you what, the more I study Joseph, the more I love this account. And the more I learn, so many things I've, in years past, just missed. And these verses are just chock full of tremendous information to help me live the Christian life by application of principles in dealing with people, dealing with employers, employees, in dealing with family, in making decisions, in carrying out responsibilities. Every bit of that, we see the principles that help us be successful. And I trust this study tonight will help you as you leave the building or leave wherever you are and put it into practice. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for the study. Thank you for your word that guides and directs us when we apply the principles to our lives. Thank you for Joseph and the tremendous lessons that we learned from him as to how to be successful in serving you and serving our fellow man. Thank you for loving us and taking care of us. Please bless those of us who are dealing with health issues, that the right decisions can be made, the right determinations can be made, that if it's at all possible, healing and wellness and restoration can be a part of their lives. We thank you for knowing more about every situation than we do, and help us to accept whatever answer you give us, trusting in you that you know better than we. Bless the church here. Help us grow. Help us teach our community about you and your will, and help us lead people to obedience to your will. Thank you, God, for loving us. In Jesus' name, amen.